The galactic quarantine. The emergency lights bathed the galactic assembly chamber in deep crimson, casting long shadows across the 1,000 seats that rose in perfect geometric spirals toward the domed ceiling. For the first time in 3 centuries, every single seat was occupied. Representatives from 217 civilized worlds had answered the emergency summons, their various forms of locomotion carrying them through the vast doors with an urgency that made even the most composed species forget their usual diplomatic graces. At the center of it all, High Coordinator Vex Theta stood on the speaking platform, her crystalline form refracting the red light into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. The Zelathi were known for their emotional control, their bodies literally hardening under stress. But today even she showed hairline fractures across her surface. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers, reaching every corner of the vast space. The Void Plague has consumed 12 systems in the past 30 cycles, she announced, and the chamber erupted into a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and guttural sounds as each species expressed their fear in their native tongue. She raised one transparent hand, and gradually silence returned. Our most advanced medical minds, our greatest warriors, our most sophisticated AI systems have all failed to stop its spread. At the current rate of expansion, it will reach the core worlds within 60 cycles. The weight of her words settled over the assembly like a funeral shroud. The Void Plague was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't merely a disease or an invasion. It was something that seemed to exist between dimensions, consuming not just organic matter but the very fabric of space itself. Entire planets had been reduced to gray, lifeless husks in a matter of days, their surfaces covered in writhing shadows that defied every known law of physics. From the upper tiers, Ambassador Kethlar of the Morvac Confederacy descended toward the speaking platform. His 6 legs moved with deliberate precision, each step calculated to convey both respect and urgency. The Morvac were among the oldest species in the assembly, their civilization spanning 50,000 years of recorded history. When Kethlar spoke, others listened. Honored delegates, he began, his mandibles clicking softly to emphasize certain words. I propose something that many of you will find disturbing. I propose we break the soul quarantine. The reaction was immediate and violent. Several delegates leaped to their feet, their various appendages gesturing wildly. The Terranian ambassador's feathers ruffled so severely that they began molting onto the delegates below. The aquatic Bilowians in their mobility tanks churned the water so vigorously that it sloshed over the edges. You speak madness, shouted Councillor Zix from the Andromedan Union, his 3 eyes blinking in rapid succession. The humans were quarantined for good reason. They are chaos incarnate, a species that thrives on destruction and disorder. Kethlar remained still, weathering the storm of protests with the patience of his ancient race. When the shouting finally subsided to angry murmurs, he continued. Yes, the humans were quarantined 50 years ago. Yes, they proved too unpredictable, too violent, too willing to break every rule of civilized warfare. But perhaps that is exactly what we need now. The chamber fell silent, the kind of silence that comes when an uncomfortable truth has been spoken aloud. Every species present remembered the human integration attempt 5 decades ago. It had started with such hope. Humanity had just achieved faster than light travel, and the Assembly had voted to welcome them into the galactic community. But what followed was 3 years of absolute chaos. Where other species followed the rules of engagement that had governed interstellar conflict for millennia, humans ignored them entirely. They turned merchant vessels into warships, used asteroids as kinetic weapons, and once even detonated an entire moon to stop an invasion force. They formed alliances one day and broke them the next if it served their purposes. They fought with no regard for their own casualties, willing to sacrifice entire fleets for strategic advantages that other species couldn't even comprehend. The final straw had come during the border conflict of 23A7, when a human commander named Jackson Hayes had responded to a formal challenge of ceremonial combat by ramming his damaged destroyer into the enemy flagship, destroying both vessels and killing thousands. The Assembly had voted unanimously to quarantine Earth and all human colonies, surrounding them with automated defense platforms that would destroy any ship attempting to leave or enter the Sol system. I was there, Kethlar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper that still carried throughout the chamber. I voted for the quarantine. I believed we were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous element. But I also remember something else about the humans. They survived. Every impossible situation, every overwhelming force, every certain defeat, they survived. They adapted. They found solutions where none should exist. High Coordinator Vexitheta's crystalline form chimed softly as she moved, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. What you propose would require a unanimous vote. Every single delegate must agree to temporarily lift the quarantine. The automated defenses will not deactivate otherwise. Then let us vote, Kethlar said simply. But first, let me remind you all of one more thing. The humans have a saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." The void plague threatens to consume everything we have built over millions of years. Perhaps it is time to embrace the chaos we once feared. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours. Some delegates argued that the humans might make the situation worse, that their unpredictability could accelerate the plague's spread. Others worried that once freed, humanity might seek revenge for their 50-year imprisonment. But as reports continued to arrive of more systems falling to the void plague, the arguments grew weaker. Finally, it was Counselor Zix himself who changed his position. "I despise everything about human methodology," he said, his 3 eyes focusing on different delegates as he spoke. "They represent everything our civilized galaxy has evolved beyond. But if we die holding on to our principles while a solution exists, then we are not civilized. We are simply extinct." One by one, the votes were cast. The Zealothi, with their logical minds, voted yes. The Morvac, remembering ancient wars where desperate measures had saved them, voted yes. The Terranians, their warrior culture secretly admiring human tenacity, voted yes. Even the peaceful Bilowians, watching their homeworld star system appear on the plague's projected path, voted yes. When the final tally appeared on the chamber's central display, it showed unanimous consent. 217 civilizations had agreed to unleash the one force they feared might be worse than the plague itself. High Coordinator Vexitheta inputted the command codes that would deactivate the Sol quarantine. The automated defense platforms that had kept humanity imprisoned for half a century would power down in a matter of hours. As the command was sent, she turned to address the assembly one final time. "We have made our choice. Now we must live with the consequences. May the ancient stars help us all." As delegates began to file out of the chamber, preparing to return to their worlds and ready their defenses, Ambassador Kethlar remained on the speaking platform. He gazed up at the star map displayed on the dome above, watching as the Sol system's red quarantine marker turned to green. He had studied human history extensively during their brief integration attempt. He knew their capacity for both creation and destruction, their ability to find victory and defeat, order and chaos. The plague was spreading faster now, 3 more systems going dark even as he watched. But for the first time since the crisis began, Kethlar felt something he hadn't experienced in cycles. Hope. Dangerous, chaotic, unpredictable hope. "They called us during their first radio transmissions," he murmured to himself, remembering an ancient Earth broadcast he had discovered in the archives. "They sent a message into the dark asking, 'Is anybody out there?' Now we are the ones calling to them." He turned and made his way toward the exit, his 6 legs carrying him with renewed purpose. There was much to prepare. The humans were coming, and with them would come the chaos that the galaxy had spent 50 years trying to forget. But sometimes, Kethlar thought as he entered the transport that would take him to the communication center, chaos was exactly what order needed to survive. When chaos became our strength, the message reached Earth at 1432. Greenwich Mean Time on what humans had marked as October 15th, 2437. It penetrated the supposedly impenetrable quarantine barrier, arriving at every major communication hub simultaneously. In Beijing, Moscow, New Washington, and a dozen other cities, screens flickered to life with an alien face that no human had seen in 50 years. Captain Sarah Chen was in the middle of a war game simulation when the message arrived. As commander of the UES Prometheus, one of the many ships humanity had built during their isolation, she had been preparing for a day that might never come. The day the barriers fell, either by force or by choice. When Ambassador Kethlar's insectoid face appeared on her bridge's main screen, every crew member froze. "Humans of Earth," Kethlar began, his translated voice carrying undertones of desperation that transcended species. I am Ambassador Kethler of the Galactic Assembly. 50 years ago, we imprisoned you out of fear. Today, we come to you out of hope. A plague unlike anything we have encountered threatens to consume all life in the galaxy. Our methods have failed. Our weapons are useless. We need your help. The bridge remained silent for a full minute after the message ended. Then Lieutenant Commander Torres spoke what everyone was thinking. It's a trap. Has to be. Sarah stood from her command chair, walking slowly toward the view screen where the message had begun to replay on loop. Maybe, she said quietly. But look at the background. Look at their assembly hall. The crew looked closer. Behind Kethler, they could see other aliens, many appearing wounded or exhausted. The legendary order and perfection of the Galactic Assembly was nowhere to be seen. This was desperation made manifest. Captain, the communications officer called out. We're receiving technical data. Specifications of the plague, affected systems, their failed attempts at containment. It's everything. Complete intelligence disclosure. Sarah studied the data flowing across her screens. The plague was indeed unlike anything in human experience, but there were patterns. Chaotic patterns that the orderly minds of the assembly might miss, but that human intuition could grasp. She made her decision. Send a response, she ordered. Tell them we're coming. But we do this our way. The response from humanity reached the assembly in record time. It was not the diplomatic, carefully worded acceptance they had expected. It was simple and direct. Humanity accepts. No rules, no restrictions. We fight as we choose, agreed? The assembly's agreement was unanimous and immediate. Within hours, the quarantine barrier fell, and humanity erupted from the Sol system like water from a broken dam. They came not in the orderly battle formations the galaxy knew, but in a chaotic swarm of vessels of every size and configuration. Cargo haulers retrofitted with weapons, mining ships turned into ramming vessels, and sleek warships that had been built in secret during the isolation. Leading them all was the Prometheus, with Captain Chen at its helm. The first engagement with the Void Plague came at the edge of the Kepler system, where the assembly had established their final defensive line. The plague manifested as a writhing mass of shadows that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially elsewhere. Assembly ships fired their energy weapons to no effect, the beams passing through the shadows as if they weren't there. This is where being human helps, Sarah told her bridge crew. We don't fight what we see. We fight what we feel. She ordered something that made the assembly observers gasp. The human ships began flying in seemingly random patterns, dropping mines not in strategic positions but in chaos patterns that seemed to make no sense. They fired weapons not at the plague but at empty space around it. To the orderly military minds of the assembly, it looked like madness. Then the first mine detonated, not with an explosion but with a gravitational pulse that rippled through space-time itself. The plague's shadows writhed, suddenly partially visible in normal space. More mines detonated, each pulse forcing more of the plague into their dimension. Now, Sarah commanded, and the human fleet struck with everything they had. But not with energy weapons or conventional explosives. They used jury-rigged devices that humanity had invented during their isolation. Weapons that broke every treaty and convention of civilized warfare. Quantum destabilizers that caused matter to forget its own existence. Probability bombs that forced targets to experience every possible state simultaneously. Weapons that were as much philosophy as technology. The plague recoiled, something the assembly had never seen it do. For the first time, it showed something that might have been pain or fear, and the humans pressed their advantage with a ferocity that reminded the galaxy why they had been quarantined in the first place. But the real genius of the human strategy wasn't in their weapons. It was in their willingness to do what the assembly never could. When a section of the plague adapted to their quantum weapons, a human captain named Marcus Webb did the unthinkable. He overloaded his ship's faster-than-light drive while still in normal space, creating a cascade failure that turned his vessel into a temporary black hole. He and his crew of 300 died, but they took a massive section of the plague with them. Other human captains followed suit, using their ships as weapons, their crews as ammunition. They fought with a disregard for their own survival that horrified and amazed the assembly in equal measure. Where the assembly fought to preserve, humans fought to win, and the distinction made all the difference. The turning point came when Sarah realized something the assembly's scientists had missed. The plague wasn't just consuming matter, it was trying to communicate. The chaotic patterns of its movement weren't random destruction, but a desperate attempt at contact from a dying dimension. "It's not a plague," she announced to the combined fleet. "It's a refugee crisis. Something destroyed their dimension, and they're trying to escape into ours. They're not evil, they're terrified." The Assembly's response was predictable. They wanted to study, to debate, to find an orderly solution. Sarah's response was purely human. She took her ship directly into the heart of the plague, no shields, no weapons active. It was insane, suicidal, and exactly what was needed. Inside the plague, she found what she expected. Billions of consciousness from a collapsed dimension, desperately trying to survive in a universe where they couldn't properly exist. They weren't consuming worlds out of malice, but out of a desperate attempt to anchor themselves in reality. The solution came from humanity's chaos. Instead of fighting or fleeing, they offered symbiosis. Human bodies, with their chaotic neural patterns and adaptable DNA, could host the interdimensional refugees without being consumed. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't safe, but it was possible. One by one, human volunteers came forward, offering themselves as hosts. The process was painful, dangerous, and irreversible. But it worked. The plague beings found anchor points in human consciousness, and the consumption of worlds stopped. When the crisis ended, the galaxy was faced with a new reality. Thousands of humans now carried interdimensional beings within them, becoming something new, something that terrified and fascinated the Assembly in equal measure. The ordered galaxy they had known was gone, replaced by something far more chaotic but infinitely more resilient. High Coordinator Vex Theta stood before the Assembly once more, this time with Captain Sarah Chen beside her. Sarah's eyes now held flecks of shadow that moved independently, a sign of the being she now carried within her. "The humans have saved us all," Vex Theta announced, "but they have also changed us. The quarantine is lifted permanently. Humanity will take their place in the Assembly, not as members to be controlled, but as equals to be respected." Sarah stepped forward to address the Assembly, her voice carrying new harmonics from her interdimensional passenger. "You feared us because we brought chaos. But chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's its partner. You needed us not despite our unpredictability, but because of it. The universe isn't a machine to be maintained. It's a dance to be danced." As she spoke, human ships continued to arrive from Earth, carrying not weapons but teachers, artists, and philosophers. They brought with them the chaos that the Assembly had feared, but also the creativity, passion, and adaptability that the galaxy desperately needed. The Void Plague crisis had ended, but its resolution had begun something far more significant. The integration of chaos into order, of human unpredictability into galactic civilization. It would not be easy, and it would not be peaceful, but it would be survival. And in the end, that's all that mattered. Ambassador Kethlar, watching from his seat, allowed himself the equivalent of a smile. He had gambled everything on humanity's chaos, and they had not disappointed. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that had always been the point. Order without chaos was stagnation. Chaos without order was destruction. Together, they were evolution. The stars continued to burn, indifferent to the drama below, but for the first time in 50 years, humanity was among them once more. And this time they were here to stay.